the imagination being as sort of like an amorphous shape and then kind of solidifying into something that shapes us for a while, how does that kind of continue on from the way Marx viewed the imagination?
Yeah. Well, Marx never really spoke very much about the imagination, and there's a very specific reason. Marx was a 19th century philosopher, and he was a 19th century philosopher who emerged out of this split in German philosophy. And not to go too deeply into it, one side of this split descended into what Marx would have termed Romanticism. These are certain followers of Immanuel Kant, certain followers of Hegel, who believed that the imagination was really supreme in the world, and that all you needed to do was sort of free your own individual imagination, and you could free yourself from society's ills. And, you know, maybe the present day equivalent of this are like maybe, you know, people who believe that if you just listen to the right music, or you do the right drugs, or you read the right books, you're somehow going to get free of the forms of oppression and forms of exploitation that affect you. And that really it's up to the individual to radicalize their imagination and escape. Marx was dead set against this approach. And instead, Marx went the other direction out of this 19th century German debate in German philosophy towards materialism. And that's the idea that, in fact, the imagination emerges from the material relations of society. They emerge from who has the money, who has the wealth, and who has the power. Marx, in his famous text, the 18th Brumaire of Napoleon Bonaparte, sort of famously summed it up that the ruling ideas of society are the ideas of the ruling class. And you can understand that really cleanly in the 19th century, when the only people really who get to publish books, or who get to write music, or who get to publish art, these would be like ruling class people, and they'd be ruling class Europeans, white Europeans, and men mostly. So these people really got to dominate the realm of ideas in society. And Marx said, look, these people can be as radical as they want to be. They can talk, you know, they can have, make up incredible, fantastical ideas and forms of art and culture. But in the end, they're only emerging from one group in society, and that's the group that has power, which is essentially rich, white European men. Instead, what Marx implied in talking about the imagination is, if we want a real radical imagination, if we want to see an imagination that emerges from something that could really transform society, we need to look to the imagination of those people who are experiencing oppression and exploitation. For Karl Marx, that was the working class. And Marx understood the working class as very narrowly, really. He was interested in the industrial working class, the workers in the factories. He was mostly interested in what he understood to be the vanguard working class, which were mostly white, mostly male workers in England and Germany and France. But I think we can look to inheritors of Marx's legacy to find a different story, and one whose work has been really influential on me and other people who've talked and written about the radical imagination is Robin D.G. Kelley, who's a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. Robin Kelley has a great book called Freedom Dreams about the Black radical imagination in America over the 20th century. And there he points to the way that Black radical thought, from the Black Panthers to Paul Robeson to Thelonious Monk to some of today's hip hop artists to, you know, a whole range of actors throughout the 20th century, has been a dialogue of people who are, suffering some of the worst forms of exploitation and oppression in society. And out of that exploitation and oppression, and out of the dialogue between, on the one hand, philosophy, and on the other hand, art and culture, you get these ideas that are capable of transforming the world. And indeed, Kelley's argument is that this form of radical imagination that emerged in the Black experience, both in the United States and in the broader global frame, has really reshaped the imagination of all sorts of populations, in North America and around the world as well. So I think in an example like that, you can see almost a better articulation of the imagination than Marx himself could have provided, because he was very allergic to the term. He hated the idea of the imagination. There's only one time when it appears, which I think is really significant, and maybe I'll just close with this. He says something very interesting in one of his texts. I think it's the first volume of Capital, which is, and I can't quote it verbatim, but he says, you know, what separates the worst architect in the world from the best beehive in the world is that the architect, unlike the bee, the architect constructs the structure they're going to build in their imagination first. The bees, for Marx, do it by instinct. The architect does it first through the imagination, and then the imagination builds a building. I have my doubts about Marx's understanding of how bees work, and I think some of the interesting research that's been done on bees and hive and herd behaviors recently might make us rethink that. But I think it's the sharpest articulation Marx ever had about what he thought the imagination is, and I think it's our ability to project ourselves into the future, our ability to make plans, our ability to strategize, and our ability to change the world together. But for Marx, it's significant that he talks about an architect and not, for instance, a musician or not a visual artist, right? Marx is always interested in how we transform the physical world together, under what conditions and under what situations.
Okay, the reason why I even asked was because it just seemed to me, where we're talking about structures and forms, I figured, you know, him being in a time period, that he probably did have something to say about it.